to our very first interview. I'm proud to be here. My name is Bobby Zirkin, former state senator. I'm here with Rashern Baker, Democratic candidate for governor of the state of Maryland. We're here on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association in partnership with Stevenson University here at the beautiful Stevenson University campus. And welcome.
Senator, thanks for having me. It's good to be here and good to kick off the event.
Well, we appreciate you being first. And so we're going to have an hour to talk about issues, talk about yourself and your vision for the state of Maryland. So we're going to get through a lot of issues, a lot of really important issues that I think the state and its citizens want to hear. So let's start with, who is Rushern Baker? For those who may not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got here.
That's a really good question. I often think about how I actually got here, not driving here, but how I came to be into public service and into running for governor. I grew up in the military, so I lived all around the world, including Okinawa, Japan, and my dad's last duty station was in Massachusetts. And so 2 years after coming back to the States, we lived in Massachusetts, and then I came to Howard University for undergrad and for law school. And the reason I went to Howard University was, I really wasn't a good student when I was coming up. In fact, I tell my kids to be like their mother. I got kicked out of every school in the United States and a couple overseas. But when we came back to the States, it was right after the busing issues in Boston in 1970, 75, 76. And we were living north of Boston in Beverly, Mass. And I really wasn't aware of the issues going on in the community, but I had a teacher, an English teacher, that took an interest in me and made me aware of the social injustices that were going on. It was really interesting because I was the only black student in this school in Beverly. And this teacher, English teacher, really wanted me to be aware of the responsibilities. And so they got me to thinking about my role and the opportunities I'd been given because I had such great parents. And so I wanted to do something different with my life. So at 17, I decided I should go into public service after having a conversation with my dad, who, when I was complaining about the local politician, he said, well, if you can do better, run. And I decided to do that. And that started a career of me going to Howard University in DC, going to law school. And in law school, I lived in Prince George's County. And I really liked the county and decided that that's where, my wife and I settled and I'd start my career. So I was fortunate enough to run for the state legislature and to win and to go on judiciary, a committee that you know well and I loved. So I spent my first 4 years on judiciary. Then I moved over to appropriations and then decided to run for county executive. I didn't win the first time I ran. I didn't win the second time I ran. I won the third time that I had for county executive. So I served 8 years as county executive, and that really was an interesting time. I know we'll get to it. So 8 years in the legislature, 8 years as county executive, and then really the rest of that practicing law. And being
while you were county executive, you were able to continue practicing law? Or was
well, when I was in the state legislature, I practiced law. As county executive, it's a full-time job, so I didn't. But after I left the county executive seat, I ran a nonprofit, I'm sorry. After I left the legislature, I ran a nonprofit, and then now I do some teaching at University of Maryland, and I work with county executives and county judges and mayors from around the country on executive leadership.
That's great. And now you're running for to become the governor of the state of Maryland.
Yes.
Well, let's get into that a little bit.
Okay.
So before we get into, I'm going to have a lot of specific issues that I'd like to talk to you about, but give you a couple minutes just to kind of give your stump speech. What does a Rushern Baker administration look like?
Well, I think for me, what made me decide to run again, because I had been out, and I ran in 2018 for governor. I didn't win, but I felt like I had a good public career. 8 years in the legislature and 8 years as county executive of Prince George's County. I know you remember what it was like in 2010 when I took over. The county executive was on his way to jail. Yep. The stock market had crashed and Prince George's County was leading the nation in foreclosures. Our homicide rates were through the roof. And all of these issues hit at the time that I took over. And so it was a hard 8 years. But in those 8 years, we were able to bring crime down 50% at the same time we reduced the risk. We were able to turn our economy, which I've focused on, to not only being last in the state in terms of job creation, but actually leading the state 5 years in a row. And then we had economic development throughout the county. So I felt good about what I had done. But COVID changed all that. During COVID, my wife and I were quarantined together. And I got a chance to just start looking at what was going on, not just in Maryland, but what was going on nationally. And I started thinking about Maryland's role in leading, not just the state, but leading the nation on how you do things right. One, disparities in healthcare, which I had dealt with. Racial injustice, something I think we as a state, can lead on. And I thought about the experiences that I learned as a legislator, both in judiciary and on appropriations, and 8 years leading the second largest jurisdiction in the state, which one of the biggest budgets in the state. And I just couldn't sit on the sideline. I thought the skills and things that I'd learned would help us lead our way out of this crisis and make Maryland not only just better, but also a leader in the nation.
So what is let's talk about a couple of these issues that you brought up. If you, looking at the polls, the top two issues by a long shot are, in fact, COVID and criminal justice, both things that you brought up. So let's start with COVID. Governor Hogan gets high marks around the country for his handling of the pandemic, and he certainly is getting high marks here. What has he done that's been good? What would you do that's different? And I guess with this new variant that's spiking cases again, where are we going from here?
Well, I think here's my different take on what the governor's done. I think in terms of handling and reassuring the public that there's somebody in charge, he's done a great job. The issue that I have, and I think is different because I had actually run a county, is that every county has a health officer. That health officer is jointly appointed by the governor and the county executive or the mayor of Baltimore. And so that means the governor's office, the health officer for the governor, is actually the leader on how we deal with these crises. Every county has a Homeland Security department. We had one in Prince George's County, which means in times of crisis and emergency, that's where you lead from. And so for me as governor, I think the way we would do it is to call all those folks together and map out a Maryland plan, working with the local jurisdictions, knowing that they're individually different, but really having one voice. The governor is the only person that can bring every jurisdiction together. So if Montgomery County has a COVID plan and Prince George's County has a different COVID plan, COVID doesn't care that you're in Prince George's County or Maryland, or Montgomery County or Howard County. So the governor has to be able to do that. And so from my perspective, that's where the leadership part comes in. In dealing with this crisis, we have to understand that the governor working with the local jurisdictions to make sure these issues are addressed is where I would go.
So I guess specifically, kind of the two most controversial topics, I guess, if you look at the news, are vaccine mandates and mask mandates. So,
right.
We have not done that here. We don't have mask mandates across, or we have at certain periods of time. What do you think? Should we have? My kids are in school. They have to wear a mask every single day there, and they get quarantined when there's a little bit of an outbreak. What does it look like? I mean, besides bringing people together, what are the specifics of it?
I think the specifics of it is just that, is that you actually have the lead taken from the governor's office, working with each jurisdiction. So I think in jurisdictions where we see the spike is up, you need a mask mandate in those, especially in our schools. In jurisdictions where it isn't, then you wouldn't have to have that. But the problem is, if every individual jurisdiction is making that decision and they're right next to each other, then it has an impact on the state as a whole. And I think the only person that can bring them together is the governor, and assigning somebody to look at those. So right now, in Prince George's County, if you're in a restaurant, you don't have to wear a mask. Montgomery County is going toward, well, we're going to have the mask back. Schools were closed in one part and weren't closed in the other. So I think it has to be a universal policy. Vaccines, we know they work. As governor, I think you should follow the science, is what I did as county executive when we were dealing with issues. But you have to lead at the state level and then make sure the jurisdictions are following that.
So not to press you too hard on it, but since the science is fairly clear, in fact, I would say abundantly clear that vaccines do in fact work and boosters are necessary and so forth, should we have a vaccine mandate here? We have an odd national, it's an odd law from the Fed, or a regulation from the feds that if you come into the country, you have to be vaccinated and you have to quarantine. But if you are traveling around the country, you do not. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. That
Right.
seems disjointed. Should we have vaccine mandates here in the state of Maryland?
I think we should have vaccine mandates, with the exceptions being, certainly you have to make exceptions for religious exceptions, and for, my wife, before she passed, was immune deficiency. So those are things you have to look out. Outside of that, it's a health, crisis. And so we do it when we send our children to school. This is not one of the things where you make a decision and it just affects you. It affects everybody. And so it's a hard decision, but it's one that as governor, I'd want our folks to make. And then you start making changes as the facts change. But I think you do need a mandate with the exceptions that I talked about.
Okay. So I guess the other issue that you brought up was criminal justice. And I know
Yes.
in Prince George's County, as you said, tremendous, I think 50% reduction
Yes.
in violent crime when you were county executive. Maryland is now kind of in the other direction, particularly, I live in the Baltimore region, and we have had a stubbornly high homicide rate, and the non-fatal shootings are even higher. It is just a number that will not go down. And so I guess I'll just throw it out as a general question. What does the Rashern Baker administration do about criminal justice and more specifically about public safety in places like Baltimore City?
So one of the things that I did when I came in, we saw our homicide rates just spiking tremendously. And so what I did was brought not just our police department and our sheriff's department and state's attorneys, but also our health department and our economic development. I brought everybody together in a plan, what we called our Transforming Neighborhoods Initiative, where we targeted 6 areas in the county where everything was going in the wrong direction, whether it was homicides, truancy, all of these things that I know all go together. You start looking at those trends, that they're going in a bad direction. But you have to do 2 things at the same time. One, you have to deal with the crime, and 2, you have to prepare for the future. And so the way that we did it, this was before, Ferguson or Freddie Gray, we revamped our police department. We revamped training to get to more, to reduce violent encounters from the police department and citizens. But we didn't reduce the police force. We didn't reduce the funding, but we did use technology and training. And we also brought in other things to help in the community. So the police department wasn't acting as the social workers or the health department. And we used the governor's office, Governor O'Malley at the time, to come in and say, well, here's how you can help us. Provide us with more money for the sheriff's department so they can go out and serve outstanding warrants. 2, give us more money for state's attorney so that office is better. Give us money for training in the state's attorney's department. And let's use the state police with helicopters to help us to track these things. And then the governor's office was meeting with us every Monday. For the first year, we had what we call our crime meeting. Every Monday, it was not just the police department, the state's attorney, the sheriffs. It was the governor's office. It was also our school system, our superintendent. it was our health officer. It was everybody coming together and saying, how do we deal with these issues? And so what I see in Baltimore is the same thing, or any other part of the state, and that is the governor's office coming in as a partner and saying, okay, well, where are the things? So in Baltimore, I said this the other day, why don't we have a gun court? So if we know guns in the hands of folks out there, let's see if we can prosecute those things quicker. How do we make sure we use resources to staff up the state's attorney's office and to help that office so that they can prosecute better? And the other things that are the intangibles for the mayor, just like for me as county executive, is how do we create job opportunities for these young folks? How do we make sure kids are going to school and truancy and that thing? And health. Health is one of the biggest factors in both our criminal justice system and our education system. Mental and behavioral health for individuals and for families. Well, we have the ability as a county, a city, but as the governor to deal with those issues. So it's working together with all of them. And when people say, well, how do we know it will work? Well, the reason we know it will work is in Prince George's County, we had 105 going to about 106 homicides when I took over. By the time we left, we were down to less than 50. And it's because we didn't look at it as a short-term strategy, that how do you get it down today? Like some people have hot spots. But that only works for a short period. What we did was took the long view. We attacked crime where it was in the short term, but we also planned for the long view, which is something I know, another area I know you're going to want to talk about, and that's our returning citizens. What we started to do was work with returning citizens before they returned.
Right. In the prisons.
In the prison.
So I do want to get there. I want to take a step back though in terms of the short term and some of the things that are being talked about right now. Governor Hogan has come out with, again, a plan which is obviously focused on the short term, but two of the hallmarks of it are, two of the kind of linchpins are what he calls judicial transparency, so putting more of a spotlight onto the decisions that are being made when there are violent criminals, and also to increasing penalties for illegal possession of guns. It's something that the legislature has fought, and President Ferguson came out and said that this was reactive.
Right.
I guess the question is, when you have so many cases that are getting, that there are individuals that are kind of coming in and out of the court system and are getting slaps, why is that a bad idea in your opinion? And if so, why?
Yeah, it's a bad idea because it doesn't work. I mean, and if you've ever, run a major municipality, you could tell right away it wasn't. If you'd have brought that to me as county executive, I'd say, well, yeah, that's not going to help me.
Which part of it? Both?
Actually, both. Because what we found is, one, you do need to have effective prosecution. That is a given. You want to make sure that there are strong cases, that you can get convictions, and that you can get long-term convictions there. The laws are already in place. But that's none of the things that the governor is talking about will help with that. What would help with that is, one, you have a strong office in the state's attorney where you give more prosecutors, you provide more training for those prosecutors so they can put together better cases. Police training, so we have better policing where we actually get evidence and things of that nature, so that once we do get a conviction, they're gone. And we look out at outstanding records. We have a number, for us in Prince George's County, it was, outstanding warrants, felony warrants, how do we get that backlog up? Those are the things that are going to help you build a better case, have a longer sentence, which you can already do right now, and have some impact. The other thing that would have an impact is better policing, making sure that you had information before, these crimes occur. And the police used to tell us is that they're really good at solving crimes and responding to crimes. They're not good at preventing crimes. So what we do know is that a lot of the things that we have, when I talk about health, it really is prevention. A lot of the folks that interact with us either are health problems. You think about whether it's Baltimore City or Prince George's County, you look at drug abuse, mental health. So folks are talking about, people with mental health and behavioral health. All of those things we could pinpoint, especially since COVID, pinpoint right now. Those are the things that would be helpful. A gun court, not something I would have thought about as county executive, but given the number of, cases we have with folks with illegal guns, being able to streamline that process where we could actually, prosecute them quickly. In our case, in the 2000s in Prince George's County, it was drug courts. How do we get these individuals who are clogging up our courts, quickly, dealt with so that we can get to the violent criminals? Those are the things that are going to help, and providing resources. The Maryland police are great individuals and could be, a benchmark. We work with federal police, to help us. Those are the things that are going to get to the long-term and short-term solution.
So, just not to get away from, I just want to ask it one, maybe in a different way. One of the things that has been around in the General Assembly for the last few years has been a fight about sentencing, and the governor has wanted to increase sentences to ensure that people are getting put away when they are repeat offenders, not just for the first time, and not about drugs, not about not individuals who are possessing or who are addicts, but individuals who are committing multiple and getting convicted multiple times for violent offenses. It's something that the Senate has passed, the House is not. Your thoughts on that, and if that's not a good idea, then I guess my question is why? Like, why shouldn't why should or should not individuals who are committing repeat violent crimes get put away for longer sentences?
Well, the ability to do that is already in the hands of the judges now. They could actually, we have pretty good laws, and I served on judiciary, so I know this, pretty good laws where you can get a long sentence. The question becomes, is it really just, to me, that's more of the reactionary. If we have if you have it on the books and they can give a longer sentence, then you solved it. Well, no, you really haven't. It's probably a couple of things that we should be doing, and that is repeat offenders, which we know they're going to repeat. Recidivism, I know you know this as a chair, and I saw it when I was on judiciary. There are folks we could spot who are going to commit this crime with a gun right now. They're going to go to prison for a short time, and they're going to come out, and they'll commit a violent crime. Well, if we know that already, then we should know how to deal with them while we have them in our custody. And we know where they're going to return to. So what do we do on that end? So for me, it's, you could have a longer sentence. It doesn't mean they'll get a longer sentence. It means what does the case look like? So if we want longer sentences for folks who are committing these crimes, then we have to have better prosecution, more prosecutors so they're not handling like 70 cases and then trying to get the first one off the docket. All of those things we could do immediately that will have a greater impact than waiting down the road.
Okay. How about juvenile justice? Any thoughts about that? Obviously, 20 years ago, it was Hickey and Cheltenham, which out in Prince George's County, big monster institutions, and that's all been broken down, but still a stubbornly high recidivism rate. Thoughts about what to do there?
Yeah, I think juvenile justice is one of the issues that's one of the most challenging ones we're going to face, to be all in honesty. I know during my time as a member of judiciary, it was one of the reasons I had to leave judiciary. It's just depressing. As county executive, you're faced with it because you run a jail and you're dealing with these individuals. So for me, that's the area I think we need to put the greatest focus on. I know one of your former colleagues, Jim Brochin, talks about this a lot. The individual who just dropped out, Mike Rosenberg, he talked about a lot about what we could do around juvenile justice. So clearly that's an area where I want to focus on. We start doing it as county executive, and that is looking at our school system, our truancy rates. We could just see the pattern going of kids, starting to skip school, spending more time out there. How do we interact at that level? So one, I think we begin by working with all of our schools to stop with truancy. How do we get kids to stay in school? We know that if they get an education, if they get their high school diploma, they're less likely to go out and do these things if they can find a job. How do we start doing job training? And then the real difficult part is, how do we actually deal with the children who are in our custody?
Right.
You know, and for the long term, I have a nephew who I love very much in Georgia, who started on this path as a juvenile and is now in prison for 30 years. But you could just see it going up, you know, what would happen. And interventions that at some point there could have stopped it. Clearly there was behavioral and mental health issues that we could have dealt with early on. So I don't want to make this sound like you got to wait to do it. There are things we can do immediately, which is really focusing on juvenile justice in a way that we haven't since the Glendening administration. Nobody has really tried to deal with it because it's difficult. So that means getting a person in there who understands this and is committed to the long term. The other thing is working with the jurisdictions. These children, and there are children, are going to come back. They're part of our system. How do we make sure that they're connected to the community in a positive way? I'll throw this out. One of the things we did in the county was, when we had juveniles in our school system, there's an education program there. They're being taught, but it's not connected to the school that they went to. So my kids went to Suitland High School, which is in a challenging area in Prince George's County. The children in our custody from Suitland were being taught, but they weren't being taught what they were at Suitland High School. So they were returned to school, they were behind.
Right.
It was different. Well, if we have them and we know where they go to school, why can't we tailor the curriculum to what they're behind in, so they're not behind in the school there, so that they don't feel like they're lost, that there's no reason to be there. Small things like that could have an impact on whether that child graduates or goes in another career. We have them in our custody. Why don't we talk about alternatives for them to get employment? Things that really work. If they're not going to go to college, there are some, you know, workforce development things that we could do while we have them. But that's going to be a critical area that I want to spend time on.
One of the controversies, it's interesting you brought that up, because there was legislation that went back and forth between, should there be a Department of Juvenile Services education system with its own superintendent, or should it be within MSDE, and it's kind of gone back and forth. One of the controversies in juvenile justice has been kind of the tension between the public and the private sector. Right. And you had the Cheltenhams, which were public, and the Hickeys, which are public, but then you have kind of this array of group homes and so forth, and each one individually tracking them and seeing how they're doing. Any thoughts about, I mean, I guess one of the basic questions has always been, should the private sector be in the juvenile justice, quote, business? You hear about private jails, but this is the lower level of that, and so I guess, should they be?
You know, I think there's a way you could have them involved, but my issue always is the moral responsibility is for the government to do it and to figure out a way to do it the best, because you can't farm this out. You can't farm the real, you need real oversight when it comes to juvenile justice and juvenile reform, because it's time intensive. And so it's not one, you know, the problems with group homes. We know we need them. You know, we don't have space capacity. We want individuals being in the community, but the oversight and making sure that everything, especially the education, the mental health, all of those things are conducted. So the government has to play the role in that. And I think you have to have a strong juvenile justice, you know, secretary that has the ability, as you talked about with education. I think it should be within that department. Because I've seen it both ways. I've seen it when it was within the department, and I've seen it when they took it out and said, hey, it's better to be under, you know, under the education system. But it gets lost. Right. And it's it has to be very, very tailored. You need a coordinated action, which is why the person who is in charge of juvenile justice has to have the capacity and the ability to really get things done, and to know that this is for the long haul, that the investment is, you know, long term. But if we do that, the thing that I'll point to folks is, if you look at what we did, not in the first 4 years as county executive, But if you look at the arc of the 8 years, we saw truancy drop, we saw crime drop in these areas, because more and more of our younger folks who were getting into small trouble, we were actually being able to divert at that level. So it can work, but you have to be willing to put the time and effort into it, and the resources.
It's an incredibly important and never talked about topic. So it'd be interesting solutions that you're putting out. I'd be interested to see that. Let me quickly, before we move on from criminal justice, police reform. The General Assembly last year essentially got rid of LEOBR,
Yes.
Which I know you know about from the Judiciary Committee,
Yes.
from your old Judiciary Committee days. There's still controversy. One of the candidates for governor says that there should be no ability for police to do no-knock warrants with any exceptions. Police would say that puts them at risk. Thoughts about what the General Assembly did on police reform, things that we still need to do, if anything?
Well, I give the General Assembly, credit for doing that. I not only served on judiciary, but as you know, there are local delegations that deal with, local issues. So I was the chair of the law enforcement for Prince George's County, where this issue came up time and time again, because one of the areas where you saw police abuse and was known for it, even as a student at Howard University, Prince George's County was a place where if you're an African-American male, you didn't go to. So I give them credit for, for doing this, for passing a reform and making some progress. But I also caution people, you know this probably better than anybody else. Real police reform is at the local level. What we do at the state level is a guide, but, hiring of the police chief and the captains and the majors and all of those belong to the local jurisdiction. And in our great state, we have counties that have cities within there. I had 27 municipalities in Prince George's County. Each and every one of them have a police force.
Right.
So none of them got rid of their police force during this whole, social unrest. So they're still there. So you have all of these things at the local level that we have to have change. So what I would propose is that you work on the long-term solutions for the local level. It's the state using this as an example to go to the local jurisdiction and say, here's how you do police reform right. One, better training. I know that from experience. This is not me just saying it because somebody wrote it down or did a position paper. I was there when we had a Justice Department decree that said our police department was racist and was abusing people, and you have to change it. You changed the structure of the training, the individuals in promotion there, but you all at the same time, you still have to police. You still have to make sure. And so we can't have these men and women in harm's way. I've been to too many funerals of police officers. So there's a way you can strike a balance where the training and the policing, understanding you're there to help the community, you're part of the community, and to make sure that it's very, very clear, we did this in the county, is when a police officer, when there was misconduct, that we immediately took action. We also set up an independent inspector general for our police department that had the power to prosecute cases that was outside of the police department, that could go in there if they investigate any inkling. We also increase, our citizen oversight review. So there are things that we can do to make sure we're on there and that we continuously observe it. At the same time, making sure the community is safe and that the women and men who we put in these uniforms, who we want diversity in our ranks. And so we want to make sure we train them well, we want diversity, but we also want them to be safe when they walk out there on the streets.
So let me ask you this. So numbers are starting to come out and there was some concern about this as things were moving along last year, that police forces here in Baltimore County, they're down a fairly significant number of officers. I'm certain that that's going to be the case everywhere because, if you talk to police officers, they're concerned in places like Baltimore about doing what they thought was their job and then getting prosecuted. So there's a little bit of a hands-off. And they're concerned about, that they're not respected, that the way they should be for putting themselves in harm's way. What do we do specifically about the fact that we are losing officers? Because that in and of itself is a public safety challenge.
It really is. I mean, it really is. It's something that we have to, just like you said, that we have to show that we want women and men to go into public safety, because that's what it is. It's public service. We want them. So one, the recruiting of, we want the best and the brightest to go into this field because you're actually doing good work. We want you trained. You're going to get the type of training and support that you need. And we want to hold you, but as somebody who wants excellence as an officer, you want to be held responsible for what your actions are. So we, one, have to do a good job of inviting people to be in. That's the way we're actually going to get out of it. Inviting people to be into our police departments, whether it's at the county level, the state level, or the municipal level. And we have to provide them the type of training and support.
Pay them more money?
Pay them more money, just like our teachers. I mean, we upped our pay because we're competing, especially now since the pool is shrinking. Just think about who we're competing against. We're competing against surrounding jurisdictions and surrounding states. So we want to pay them more. And with more pay, it becomes more responsibility and more oversight. The other thing we do is let the officers, so from an officer's perspective, is we're going to pay you more, we're going to provide you with better training, but we're going to provide you with ongoing educational training. So we started the first implicit bias training in Prince George's County pre-Ferguson, because we wanted our officers to go through this process, not just for the police department, but for our fire department. But we started with the police. We continuously want to do evaluations of the officers. We continuously want to do education and oversight. But we also want to educate the public. This is not a one-way street. So what we said to our police chief was, it doesn't matter whether I have confidence in you. It doesn't even matter whether your officers have confidence in you. It does matter whether the public has confidence in you. Because if they don't, what we find out is the public won't trust you with the information they have. And the police can't be everywhere. So it's the citizens that have to provide that information. If they think that they're not going to get what they should out of it, then they're not going to provide it. So we did a thing where it was engaging real community policing, not this quote thing where people say it, but you actually have to be in the community, be where they are at these meetings that they have, whether it's the faith community, whether it's the coffee club. We want you engaged in that, not just once a week for National Night Out or once a year.
So I'm going to ask you just a specific question, then I'm going to move on because we have so much to cover
I
here
know.
today and so little time. There has been legislation introduced to do away with what I thought was a community policing initiative. Here in Baltimore County, we have a very robust school resource officer program. In fact, one of our school resource officers was the National School Resource Officer of the Year. They are coaches and teachers and the like. Not to slant the question, but there's been legislation to do away with the school resource officer program, or at least to allow jurisdictions, I guess, or make it easier for them to do so in certain jurisdictions. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no. Here's the thing. I mean, if you've been in our public schools, if you've talked to parents, like I said, all three of my children went through our public school system. And we were in some challenging areas, and some were not. But every parent I talked to wanted a school resource office in that school, especially in our high school. They wanted. This is what the community and the parents asked me as county executive. In fact, it was the school and the parents that asked us to put our officers in the schools because they had a relationship in the community. So I think, we can swing too far to one side and not understand it's necessary. I mean, we just saw what happened in a school in Michigan. So having the school resource officers there, well trained, acclimated, not like a police force where they're dictating, but actually as part of the community is important. In our case in the county, we had the sheriffs that were in the schools at first, and then we had our police officers because the school asked us. Because they were building a relationship with the community at large. It wasn't as if it was a police force. So no, I think you'll find more and more jurisdictions that will say, we don't want to get rid of our resource officers because they provide, a critical need for us.
Okay. All right, we're going to take a break from that topic and move on to one that is coming up in the General Assembly. It certainly is the most high-profile issue that they're going to be dealing with maybe this year and next year, maybe just this year, and that's the issue of marijuana legalization, recreational legalization. So just to set up the question, Maryland has a robust medical program now, as do most states in the country. Maryland also decriminalizes small amounts of marijuana. It's not a criminal offense anymore, but a civil one. Now they're talking about recreational use the way that some number of states have done, starting with Colorado and all making its way to the East Coast. Thoughts about what the General Assembly should do on marijuana recreational use?
Yeah, I'm proud to say that as a delegate in Judiciary, I signed on to the first medical marijuana bill. A Republican from Baltimore County introduced it.
Don Murphy.
Don Murphy, and I signed on. And at the time, it made sense to me that we were eventually going to go down this way. The same thing with, recreational use. I mean, we have recreational use now in the state of Maryland across all demographics. We know that. So the question becomes, how do we do this in a way that makes sense? One, I think they should move toward, putting it on the ballot so the voters get a chance to deal with this issue.
Let me stop you there for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why does that, putting it on the ballot in Maryland, I'm going to ask everybody this question because I am curious about it. Putting something in the ballot in Maryland makes it go into the Constitution. Why should the General Assembly, this issue above all others, put marijuana in the Constitution? Because,
and I'll answer it this way. Both of us served in the legislature, so we understand that the best way is that we send legislators down there, they should take a vote on it. But the political reality is, what's the way that it's going to actually get done? And I think you're going to find more legislators. If I thought the legislature would pass it, I think they should. I think we should move to legalizing recreational use. If that can be done in a legislative session, that's great. I'd be for that. I think the easier way, I think the more likely way, based in my background, is going to be to put it on the ballot. But I'd be for, taking a vote on it. I think the main thing is one is getting it done, and two, looking at the laws and regulations that go along with it. One of the big things that we found out of the medical marijuana use was the fact that we weren't prepared, especially for inclusion in this. So this from working in the General Assembly. A number of, especially the Maryland Black Caucus, said, hey, African Americans and people of color are not involved in this industry or not involved in it, weren't getting some of the businesses out of this. So how do we make sure that doesn't happen with, legal cannabis? That we actually look at the regulations now, we make sure that it's included in that. And then what do we do with the resources that come out of it? We know that the war on drugs, our so-called war on drugs, had a devastating impact on communities, especially look at Baltimore City and places like that. Well, some of those resources should go back into those communities that were decimated by, marijuana, especially, communities of color. So what do we do with the resources? So I'm for legalizing recreational cannabis use. I'm for regulating how we use the resources. But I'm not one of the folks, because I know this, is that everybody thinks once you legalize recreational marijuana that you now open up the floodgates and you have all this money that's going to continue forever. Right. It isn't. That's not how our state works. So it's one in a tool of things. We have, MGM in Prince George's County. It didn't solve our financial problems. I mean, it helped. So we have to be realistic on what we could do with these resources and understand that this is just another tool. One has two purposes. One, to make sure we're not criminalizing and prosecuting people for stuff that we shouldn't be doing. And two, that we regulate the industry and actually be able to get some of those tax resources back to us. And three, that it's an opportunity to provide businesses.
So one of the other questions is, we have a robust medical cannabis industry in Maryland, and when you move away from that, other states have seen tension and problems. Some have done it better than others. How do you protect, if you think it's important to, the industry that has laid out their capital to kind of be the pioneers, as it were, for our medical cannabis industry? If you open some have suggested just allowing home grow, which would basically, people would just be, you would decapitate what is a medical industry. How do you differentiate those two things, and how do you protect, if you think it's important, what's already here?
Well, I think you just hit on a key point, and that is you got to protect the medical is for a particular reason, for medical use, and so you want to have that industry there and make it affordable so that people can actually take advantage of it, because it's for medical use. Recreational is different. I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. I've said to folks, even when I'm talking to legislators or executives from around the country, look to the areas that, for Maryland, to me, I'd always look to Massachusetts. The population is about the same. The square footage of the states are about the same. And they were doing it first. So what are some of the issues that, and more importantly, what are some of the pitfalls that you see in a Massachusetts that we can take advantage of here in Maryland? So I think, making sure that, as I said, that we take care of the industry that's here, the people who've invested, because it's for a particular purpose, and then see what's the fairest way to make sure that people have an opportunity, to participate in this new industry that we're going to regulate, and make sure we don't go the way of some of the other states that have made mistakes, or the district.
Well, we'll see if you're right, if it's going to go into our Constitution along with gambling or not. So you have been a proponent of campaign finance reform.
That's right.
There have been efforts at the state level on public financing, which I would have some questions about, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts about, at the state level, what we should be doing in terms of campaign finance. I know that was a big thing on your website, and something you talked about widely.
It was. I mean, this time running for governor, I decided to run the campaign that I want to run. As a legislator, I was for campaign finance reform. How do we do it? But it's hard to do when you actually get out here and you're running against people you need to raise money. As county executive, like everybody else in my races, I raise money from developers. That's where you get your money from. But I always talked about campaign finance reform. When I became county executive, I actually put a law in place that said, the county executive and the county council could not receive money from developers if there were ongoing projects in the county or proposed projects. So that pretty much, took away the money in there. Because what I wanted was every project we did to be one that we're doing it for the right reason, and that the public knows we're doing it for the right reason. And also, I didn't want to be hypocritical. You can't talk about campaign finance reform and then do the very things that you're against it. And so in this campaign, I decided, and I was blessed to have a running mate who actually did this in her races, Nancy Navarro, in Montgomery County. Because I think if we're going to do the changes at the state level, then we have to lead by example. And we want the decisions just think how much time we spend raising money at $6,000 a crack. In this instance, where I spend my time is actually raising money from people who can vote for me. Talking to voters about these very issues that you're talking about. Talking in forums like this, because this is how I'm actually going to get the resources to run. Because I depend on people from Maryland who can't give me any more than $250. There's a lot of folks I have to convince that I'm the right person. But I think it's the right way to go because it sends the message to the public, which is already jaded, that you're in it for the right reasons, that their voice, their $5, their $25 has a greater impact than somebody who gave $6,000 or raised $100.
So at the state level, would you be advocating for campaign finance reform that prohibits certain groups from participating, or what is it? Some years ago there was an effort to, I think it was Senator Dyson at the time, who was in Pinsky, who were pushing for public financing for state legislative races. That the bill was defeated on the floor of the Senate for a number of reasons. What is it that would be proposed at the state level for campaign finance?
I would be in favor of looking at public financing at the state level. I think there's a lot of debate about how you would do it statewide, but I do think there are examples that we can turn to. Montgomery County has done it. We didn't do it in Prince George's County. It was defeated in the council. Baltimore County is now looking at this, Howard County. So there are going to be some examples that we can see that might be of use. But I think the main thing, and this is something that you worked on and I worked on, and that is we want to make sure that politics is as clean as can be. We don't want to take away people's voice in politics because it's important.
Right.
But we also want to make sure that one side doesn't have a heavier voice than the other.
That was always a question, because you would hear people saying, and you would hear that corporations or PACs shouldn't be able to participate, but you never heard that, about unions, for example.
Exactly.
Which are the same. It's very similar. I mean, I would think
no,
you
I
agree it should
I,
be one,
I agree
one
with
size
you.
fits all, right?
That's right. I mean, you can't have it one way or the other. Either you believe in the reform that it has to be individuals, or you don't. One of the reasons I like what we're doing now, it's individuals. It is not a PAC, it is not the union, it's the individuals. I'm not saying that has to be the way the state legislature goes, but as you were saying, it's got to be one that is clear and consistent, but also make sure that everyone has a voice in there. Corporations that do business in this state should have a voice in what's going on. Unions that employ people should, have a voice in what's going on. We just have to make sure it's not a single outside. I think for me, money outside of the state is one, big money outside of the state. Is one of the things that we have to pay strict attention to. But I do think there's a way of doing it. But it's hard to have that discussion in an honest way after you've just raised, $6 million from 3 people in California.
I understand. So switching topics again, lot to cover. Right now, as we sit here, the General Assembly is back in special session, dealing with redistricting, which is incredibly important to a lot of politicians, but doesn't really register for most citizens. But it is an important issue and it certainly is an important national issue. Right now, they're dealing with the congressional maps. Soon they'll deal with the legislative ones. Let me ask a general question to you. The governor has, from day one, talked about an independent commission, a nonpartisan independent commission, and all indications are that's exactly what he put together, whether people like the maps or not.
Right.
Doesn't that make sense to have a nonpartisan independent group put together these maps rather than have politicians do it themselves for their own jobs?
Well, I think, here's the thing, and we've both been through this a number of times. When we say, a nonpartisan independent commission that's appointed by politicians, there's politics involved in it. I think the end result is what we want to look at. What are these maps looking like, and are they fair to the residents? And do citizens understand how important redistricting is? You're absolutely right. This is not going to register on the polls as the number one issue facing voters out there, but it should. I went to court suing the Trump administration over the census. That suit for undercounting in certain areas in Prince George's County was about redistricting, was about the ability to have representation for folks. The same thing with redistricting maps at the local level and at the state level and at the congressional level are important, whether your voice is heard or your voice isn't heard. And if you don't believe that, just ask Texas. So for me, it's making sure that the committee that's put together on this understands and gets a map that then the public is educated on as to whether it's fair or not fair.
Okay. It's a nice general answer. We will see how it rolls. That was a non-answer.
That's a legislative answer.
So I am getting the high sign, but I have about 10 minutes left in this thing. So I'm going to do a little bit of a rapid round, and then we're going to just give you a couple minutes just to kind of sum up. This hour is going quickly. These are rapid round yes/no-y type questions, which I'm sure I will not get. The governor did an executive order back in 2017. He talked about corporations doing business with the state. Legislation by Senator Ben Cramer, dealing with kind of this corporations that were involved in boycotting the state of Israel, something that Maryland, you would think that's not a big issue here. The governor did an executive order saying that if you as a corporation are involved in that boycott of one of our sister states, Israel, that you cannot do business with the state of Maryland, and so you're prohibited from getting contracts and being involved in our pension system and so forth. That's held for multiple years, hasn't been challenged by the General Assembly, and just to be perfectly frank, was based on a bill that I was involved in as well. The question that I would ask is, as governor, will you commit to keeping that executive order in place?
I certainly will look at all executive orders, but it sounds like one I would keep in place. And I'd say, I know it's a yes or no, but I put bills in for us to not do business with South Africa when I was, so certainly we want to look at that. Okay.
It's close. All right. Judicial elections.
Yes.
Something important to the members of the bar. It's a bill that's been around forever. I'm sure you've seen it when you were on Judiciary Committee. Should Maryland has appointed district court, appointed court of appeals, appointed court of special appeals, elections for circuit court judges. Should we keep that in place?
Okay, I probably just lost, lost votes here, but no.
We should go to an appointed.
Yeah, I think I'm in favor of, and that's a longer yes or no answer, because I'm in favor of having the Senate, reevaluate the appointments. I'm not for judges, running for election. I think I know why it was at the time. I could probably spend an hour telling you why the Maryland Legislative Black Caucus supported that when I was in the General Assembly, but I think that times have changed, and I'm not in favor of judges, running for office.
All right, I'm getting the wave behind you, so I'm gonna stop my questions here, although I have so many more. Members of the bar, let me just ask you this, and then I'll give you a chance to sum up everything before we end this conversation. Members of the bar have sent in questions ranging from things like access to justice, which is a specific issue that's of great importance to the bar, immigration, things of that. Would it be okay if we sent you questions that could be answered? Specific sections of the bar have sent in really interesting, detailed questions. Yes. I hope it's okay if we send you some questions. That would be great.
And I will answer them, yes.
Fantastic. Well, Rashern Baker, former Prince George's County executive, former delegate, you have the floor now. A couple minutes as to why should the members of the bar look to you to be our next chief executive officer of the state of Maryland?
Yeah, I think this is an important time for the state and the nation. And I think it's not about what you believe in or what you even say. It's really about what you can get done. I think this is a time when we need experience in the executive office, because we face tough issues, whether it's what we talked about today, a lot of criminal justice reform, whether it's whether it's housing, whether it's healthcare, all of those things are going to have a great impact on Maryland and on the nation. We need somebody who actually has done this before. The one thing I'm proudest about is picking a running mate, Nancy Navarro, who's actually governed in the largest jurisdiction in the state, understands the budget, understands creating jobs is important, AAA budget, is important. The same thing is my experience as county executive. These aren't positions that we're talking about and wish we could do. We've actually done it. We've walked this walk. And I think at this stage in Maryland's, Maryland's crisis, we need someone who can do that. And that's why I'm running for governor. And I'd love to have the bar's support and the members' support.
All right. Well, on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association and Stevenson University, thank you so much for spending so much time with us this morning, and good luck to you, and we look forward to seeing what comes next.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right.
All right.